Hi, my name is Dale Maley. I'd like to tell you a very interesting story today about one of the most prominent early men to live in Fairbury, Illinois, John Virgin. So let's just run through his life, shown as a timeline here. Now, Fairbury was founded back in 1857 when the railroad came through, and John Virgin came here shortly after that. He enlisted in the Civil War from Fairbury. He served for about 3 years. He was discharged. Right after the war, he got married to a Fairbury girl, a McDowell. They had 5 girls. Then he started his horse importing business, where he would import the big French draft horses called Percherons into Fairbury. And he would import those from France. He became a city alderman. He built what's called the Horse Palace in Fairbury, where he kept his horses before he sold them. He was pivotal in starting up the Fairbury Fair, the Illinois State Fair, and then we'll find out later the governor appointed him to set up the agricultural exhibit at the Chicago World's Fair in 1893. So he was a prominent businessman in the 1870s, 1880s in Fairbury. Unfortunately, though, his daughter, Georgia Annie, died at age 15 in Fairbury right after 1880. A next significant thing was the Chicago World's Fair that he helped set up. Then, unfortunately, a second daughter, Alta Zio Virgin, died at the age of 27. One of John Virgin's daughters did get married and had his only grandchild, and she named him John Virgin Cooley, born in 1897. Then, unfortunately, John Virgin went to a national convention in Chicago for the Percheron Horse Association group and died relatively young at the age of 62 in Chicago in the year 1900. Most of the old photographs that will be used in this presentation only arrived in Fairbury about 2 months ago. And it would make a whole separate video story, but basically John Virgin's widow in Fairbury, Illinois, she took her precious possessions with her to California, passed them along to her only grandson, who took them up to Montana, and his wife up there died. She took the stuff down to Arizona. She died, though, fairly quickly. Her husband lived for a while longer and died, and one of his daughters from a previous marriage thought the stuff was interesting and saved it, took it back up to Washington State, and then a lady contacted the Fairbury Museum and shipped it back recently. So my goodness, those precious family items traveled through about 6 different states over about 110 years to return back to Fairbury in 2025. So one of the long-standing mysteries in Fairbury, Illinois is who came up with the name of Fairbury? And really, nobody's been able to find that out. Alma Lewis James, who was a Fairbury historian, she noted that Octave Chanute suggested Pattonville, but Mr. Patton thought that was not a good idea since he made about 3 different farmers unhappy when he got the railroad to go through his farm and not theirs. But going through this box of Virgin family items, a new theory has developed. Since John Virgin's widow died in California, we did not have a copy of this obituary in our Fairbury newspaper, but we found a copy clipping in the box. Anyway, it noted that her family were pioneers in Fairbury, and it was by their own suggestion that the town derived its name. And this is very possibly a true story because she was a McDowell, and they were one of the first settlers in the Fairbury area in 1832. So either she or her parents could have suggested the name of Fairbury. Now, marriage or wedding certificates are fairly rare in the Midwest before the Civil War. And one of John Virgin's daughters married a guy named Hal Smith. Anyway, there's a Smith 1865 marriage certificate in very good shape found in the box. As you can see, that very old marriage certificate was a very nice document, printed in color even. And I blew up the picture that's in the inside of a typical wedding ceremony that was shown on the marriage license. Now I organized this presentation so the items found in the John Virgin box of family materials, I'm showing you those basically in chronological fashion. So here was John Virgin's little Bible that he carried with him during the Civil War. It was pretty common for soldiers to carry a small Bible with them. John's is a little bit bigger than the other ones I've seen, but it's in really good shape. It was actually printed in 1860. John Virgin hand wrote in the front page of the Bible, 1864, carried by John Virgin through the War of 61, the Rebellion. And the Civil War was usually known as the Rebellion back in that era. And I circled down and bottom the publication date of 1860 of the Bible itself. Many Civil War soldiers were worried about being killed on the battlefield and what would happen to their possessions. So in the back of the book, John wrote, "If any man should find this book, please return it to her, Y.P. Virgin, Pontiac, Livingston County, Illinois." That's where he enlisted. The property of John Virgin, a volunteer in the service of the United States at Fairbury, Illinois, August 20th, 1861. Now, the fact he made this notation is not surprising, but there's a little bit of a mystery here, because he was not married until after the war in 1865, and his mother was actually Lucinda Virgin, or L. Virgin. So we're not really sure who Y.P. Virgin was that he referred to. In addition to a Bible, many soldiers carried a small photo of their wife or their sweetheart. Well, John Virgin carried a small photo of Serepta Jane, usually known as Jenny McDowell, during the war, but somehow he accidentally dropped it on the battlefield. What's really interesting, another Union soldier actually found his missing picture of his girlfriend, and he even wrote his name and his unit number, and years later he returned it to John Virgin in Fairbury, Illinois. And I'm guessing he likely traced it because on the photo it had DeLong's Gallery, Locust Street in Fairbury, Illinois. So he probably went to Fairbury, checked in with DeLong's studio, and they recognized who the woman was in the photo. Quite a story. So here's an old photo of John Virgin. It's undated, but I'm guessing it's in the 1861 to 1865 era. And of course, it's black and white, so I colorized that using photwar.com, and it colorized very nicely. Now here's that photo of John Virgin's girlfriend, Jenny McDowell, that he accidentally dropped on the battlefield. And I also colorized it, and it also colorized very nicely. Again, I think in the 1861 to 1865 era. So John Virgin, like most soldiers, started out as a private in the Civil War, but in 1863 he got promoted to an orderly sergeant. And here's the actual certificate where he was promoted to orderly sergeant. So I had to do a little research because I never heard of the rank of orderly sergeant during the Civil War. What I found out was it was basically the same as a first sergeant of a company is today. And the orderly sergeant was the senior non-commissioned officer responsible for the company's administrative duties like keeping roll books, recording daily orders, etc. In battle, the orderly first sergeant helped form the battle line, kept the rank straight, and sometimes assumed command if the officers were killed or incapacitated. John Virgin signed up for 3 years in the Civil War, and here's a copy of his discharge certificate that was issued in 1864 when his enlistment ended. So before he went off to war in 1861, John Virgin bought and gave his girlfriend, or future wife, this photo scrapbook in 1861. It's actually in very good condition considering the age. There's about 50 old photos between the 1860s and about 1900. He wrote in here, "From John Virgin to Jenny McDowell, 1861. And since he went in service for the Civil War, that's right. I'm guessing he gave it to her right when he left for the Civil War. Here's a John Virgin black and white family photo with the 3 daughters that survived. I'm guessing this is circa 1884. Using photwar.com, I colorized this old photo, and it really came out gorgeous. Here's a colorized version of three of John Virgin's daughters, Minnie, Altazio, and Georgia. And Georgia unfortunately died at the age of 15. Also among the effects in the box was a business card from John Virgin's business. And I would call this an illustration of his horse team more than a photograph. And it's kind of poor quality and faded. And I didn't really expect it to be able to colorize it. I went ahead and tried to colorize this, not expecting very good results, so I was totally shocked when it came back, the colorized version. Just a beautiful scene with four of his large horses in the horse team. Now here's the back of that business card. And basically he showed his horses in state fairs, at least 3 different state fairs, and often won. And in those days he won a total of $12,000. And if you convert that to today's dollars, that's $400,000 in 2025 dollars. Now on the left is the old black and white photo I found of one of John Virgin's daughters, Minnie, so Minnie Virgin, and she married a guy named Cooley. And they had the only grandchild of John Virgin, which they named John Virgin Cooley. But wow, I'm really impressed with how fancy that dress was, especially in the colorized version of the photograph. John Virgin was a member of the Illinois State Board of Agriculture, and apparently one of the perks of that job is you and your wife can get free railroad passes. So in the items in the box, here were some of the free railroad passes they got on the TPNW, I think 1891-92-ish time frame. Now the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, technically it was not called the World's Fair, it was called the Columbian Exposition. As I mentioned before, John Virgin was appointed by the governor to set up the agricultural exhibit at that fair. Therefore, he was entitled to a free pass to come and go on the fairgrounds in Chicago. And here's a copy of his pass. After the Civil War, a veterans group was formed called the Grand Army of the Republic, or the short name was GAR. And John Virgin was like one of the founding members of that in Fairbury and was very active in the Fairbury Post. And here's a copy of his 1897 certificate of being a member in good standing of the GAR. In the 1897 era, often invitations to funerals were sent to friends and family. And in the box, here's a copy of one of those invitations. And it's for his daughter, Altazio Virgin, who unfortunately died at the age of 27. There was also a copy of Altazio's death certificate in the box, which said she died of tuberculosis of the bowels. I thought tuberculosis was in your lungs, so I had to look that one up. It's described as a fatal infection of the intestinal tract caused by TB, which produced long-term gastrointestinal symptoms and ultimately led to death due to complications like obstruction, hemorrhage, or widespread infection. Most of us today get to enjoy many years with our grandchildren, but John Virgin only got to spend about 3 years with his only grandchild, John Virgin Cooley. And here's a neat picture, I colorized it, of John Virgin pushing his only grandson in a buggy while they briefly lived in Chicago. I like the buggy with the big wheels in back. Now, John Virgin was the vice president of the National Percheron Horse Association. And in the box of family effects, here was the letter which invited him to the last convention that he actually attended. And he was vice president. And he went to the convention, and it came time to vote for him again as vice president, and they started the voting, and he became very ill. So they took John Virgin backstage, and he actually died backstage. But meanwhile, the convention attendees kept on voting, and they actually voted him in again, not knowing that he had died. Here's a neat colorized version of John Virgin Cooley, his only grandson, in 1905 when the grandson was 7 years old. Really liked that tricycle. In 1908, Congress passed a new law granting pensions to Civil War widows. And Serepta Virgin, or Jenny Virgin, qualified because of John Virgin's service in the Civil War. And she got $12 a month back then, which would be equal to $414 a month today. Here's a colorized version of another photograph I found of John Virgin's widow, taken about 1930 when she was living at her daughter's house in California. And I asked artificial intelligence program, and it came back and said that dress was more likely made in 1910. But pretty elegant dress and nice photograph. Here's a photo of apparently a cousin to one of John Virgin's daughters, and the black and white is shown on the left. And yet when it was colorized, very pretty young lady with a very different kind of dress in 1922. Unfortunately, we don't know what Virginia's last name was, a mystery waiting to be solved. So some closing thoughts on this video. John Virgin led a relatively short but very interesting life. He was a prominent early Fairbury businessman. And it's really a miracle this box of family items was returned back to Fairbury about 115 years after it left town. So I hope you enjoyed this video of very rare photographs and information from Fairbury's history. Please subscribe to my channel, and thanks for watching.